But even as they celebrated their victory, Russell and his fellow leaders knew that the work was far from over. The Daxamite Empire had been defeated, but the galaxy was still a dangerous place. Other powers, seeing the fall of the Daxamites, might be tempted to fill the power vacuum left in their wake. And there were still other threats, ancient, unknown, and lurking in the shadows of the galaxy, that could one day rise to challenge humanity once more. In the aftermath of the war, Earth became a beacon of hope for the galaxy. The alliances formed during the conflict evolved into a new galactic order, with Earth at its center. The new Galactic Council, composed of representatives from the various species that had joined the fight against the Daxamites, worked to ensure that peace and stability would be maintained. They established laws and protocols to prevent the rise of another empire like the Daxamites and to protect the rights and freedoms of all sentient beings in the galaxy. Russell played a central role in this new order. His leadership during the war had earned him the respect of his peers and the admiration of the people. He was appointed as the head of the new Galactic Defense Force, tasked with safeguarding the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. It was a responsibility he took seriously, knowing that the future of the galaxy depended on their ability to maintain the fragile peace they had won. But even as he took on this new role, Russell never forgot the lessons of the war. He knew that peace was not something that could be taken for granted. It had to be actively maintained. He worked tirelessly to ensure that the Defense Force was always prepared, that their technology was always advancing, and that their alliances remained strong. He knew that the galaxy was full of potential dangers, and that they had to be ready to face them head-on. As the years passed, Earth flourished. The scars of the war began to heal, and the people looked to the future with hope. The advances in technology and the alliances forged during the war had ushered in a new era of prosperity. The galaxy, once fractured by conflict, was now more united than it had ever been. Trade and cooperation between species became the norm, and for the first time in centuries, there was a real sense of optimism about the future. But Russell knew that they could not afford to become complacent. He continued to push for innovation, for the development of new technologies and strategies that would ensure humanity's continued survival and success. He encouraged the exploration of the galaxy, the search for new allies and resources, and the preparation for whatever challenges might lie ahead. And so, the story of humanity in the galaxy continued. They had faced the greatest challenge in their history and had emerged victorious. But the galaxy was a vast and mysterious place, filled with wonders and dangers beyond imagining. The future was uncertain, but Russell and his people were ready to face it, secure in the knowledge that they had the strength, the ingenuity, and the determination to overcome whatever obstacles came their way. The UES Indomitable, once a symbol of humanity's struggle for survival, now stood as a testament to their triumph. It was no longer just a warship. It was a symbol of hope, of the unbreakable spirit of the human race. And as Russell gazed out at the stars, he knew that the journey was far from over. The galaxy was their home, and they would continue to explore it, to defend it, and to shape it into a place where all sentient beings could live in peace and prosperity. In the end, it was not just about survival. It was about creating a future worth living for, a future where humanity could thrive, not just as a species, but as a member of a larger galactic community. And as long as they continued to push forward, to innovate, and to work together, Russell knew that there was nothing they could not achieve. The galaxy was theirs, and they would protect it no matter the cost. The Awakening. In the cold, silent expanse of deep space, the UEF Avalon, a massive colony ship carrying the last hope of humanity, drifted aimlessly among the stars. Its inhabitants, millions of Earth's finest, had been placed in cryo sleep centuries ago as they embarked on a mission to find a new home. The ship's systems, designed to operate autonomously, kept the crew in a state of suspended animation until the right moment. That moment came without warning, as a powerful shockwave rattled the ship, triggering emergency protocols that began the gradual process of waking the crew. Diplomat Ryan Collins, one of the ship's key negotiators, awoke to a world of chaos. Alarms blared through the corridors, and the ship shuddered under the strain of external forces. The artificial gravity flickered, causing objects to float and then slam back down as it re-engaged. Ryan's heart pounded as he pushed open the door of his cryopod, disoriented but driven by an instinctive sense of urgency. He quickly realized that the Avalon was under attack. Pulling himself into the communication station, Ryan took a deep breath and punched the transmit key. "This is Diplomat Ryan Collins of the United Earth Federation. We come in peace." "Cease your fire!" But the response was chilling. "I am Fleet Admiral Thule of the Nasat Empire. You claim to come in peace, yet you didn't even raise your shields. We will not fall for such a ruse." Ryan's mind raced as he processed the situation. The Avalon had been caught completely off guard. The Nasat Empire, an alien civilization that had been at war with humanity for centuries, had mistaken the ship's peaceful intentions for aggression. Ryan knew he had to act fast to prevent further bloodshed. "Admiral Thule," Ryan spoke with as much calm as he could muster. "We took no aggressive action because our mission is one of peace. Please allow us to meet under a truce and resolve this misunderstanding. Otherwise, millions of civilians will perish needlessly." After a tense pause, Thule finally responded, "Very well, human. I will have you shuttled to my flagship, but any further treachery, and I will personally order the destruction of your ship." Ryan exhaled in relief, though he knew the danger was far from over. As he made his way to the shuttle bay, he began formulating a plan that just might avert catastrophe for both their peoples. The human race had not crossed the stars to go quietly into the night, and if Ryan could help it, they never would. The survivors of the Avalon began to pick up the pieces, their mission now more critical than ever before. Ryan's magnetic boots clanged on the shuttle's deck as the small craft slid into the Nasat flagship's cavernous landing bay. Through the viewport, Ryan glimpsed rows of angular fighters and hulking assault mechs, a stark reminder of the firepower that could so easily shatter humanity's fragile olive branch. The shuttle settled with a hiss of hydraulics, and the airlock light blinked from red to green. "Follow me, human, and do not stray," a Nasat officer barked as Ryan stepped out, his every movement watched by dozens of alien eyes. Finally, they emerged into a soaring chamber lit by the amber glow of holoscreens. Nasat officers ringed the space, their uniforms flashing with battle insignia. And there, on a raised dais, stood Fleet Admiral Thule, a scarred veteran of countless campaigns against humanity. His carapace was battle-worn, his gaze unyielding. Ryan stepped forward and bowed, the gesture carefully practiced to convey both humility and strength. "Admiral Thule, I am Ryan Collins, lead negotiator for the United Earth Federation. On behalf of my people, I come to sue for peace between our civilizations." Thule's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Peace, human? After your kind has spilled so much Nasat blood over the centuries? After you invade our space with your so-called colony ships?" He gestured to the holoscreens, which showed sensor tracks of the other human vessels scattered across the system. Ryan held up a hand. "I understand your skepticism, Admiral. Our history is soaked in the blood of conflict. But neither of us seems to remember why we are even at war, how it started, what grievance set our species at each other's throats." He took a step forward, ignoring the twitch of Nasat rifles. "Those other ships are not an invasion force, but the beginnings of a new chapter, settlers and explorers seeking a fresh start among the stars. Just as I believe we have a chance for a new start here today," Thule hissed, his bionic eye whirring. "More humans mean more threats, more worlds to conquer and plunder." "Why should we believe your honeyed words?" Ryan met Thule's gaze steadily. "Because if we continue down this path, there will be no worlds left to conquer. We have the opportunity to end the cycle of violence and forge a lasting peace." The chamber fell silent as Ryan's words hung in the air, the weight of centuries of conflict pressing down on them all. Finally, Thule turned to his officers, his voice a low growl. "Prepare a truce table. Let us see if this human's words hold any truth." Ryan breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew that the hardest part was still to come. The future of both species hung in the balance, and it would take every ounce of his diplomatic skill to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. The initial encounter, Ryan's shuttle touched down in the vast landing bay of the NASAT flagship, its cavernous interior a stark contrast to the elegant, if damaged, halls of the Avalon. As the shuttle doors hissed open, he was greeted by a squad of heavily armed NASAT soldiers, their insectoid features unreadable but their intent clear. They were here to ensure that this meeting went according to plan, and nothing more. Ryan stepped out, his magnetic boots clanging against the metal floor as he made his way towards the imposing figure of Fleet Admiral Thule. The Admiral stood at the center of the chamber, flanked by his officers, each one a veteran of countless battles against humanity. The tension in the air was palpable, a fragile peace hanging by a thread. "Admiral Thule," Ryan began, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "I come as a representative of the United Earth Federation. Our mission is one of peace. We seek to end the bloodshed between our peoples." Thule's mandibles clicked in irritation, his bionic eye whirring as it focused on Ryan. "Peace, human? After the devastation your kind has wrought on my people? After the countless lives lost in this endless war?" Ryan met his gaze unflinchingly. "I understand the pain and suffering that both our peoples have endured. But continuing this war will only lead to more death, more destruction. We have an opportunity to change that, to forge a new path forward." Thule remained silent, his expression unreadable. Ryan knew that this was his chance, his only chance, to convince the NASAT leader to give peace a chance. "We didn't come here to fight," Ryan continued. "The Avalon and its sister ships are colony vessels, not warships. We seek a new beginning, a fresh start among the stars. And we believe that peace with the NASAT Empire is the first step towards that new beginning." The chamber was silent as Ryan's words echoed through the vast space. For a moment it seemed as though Thule would reject the offer outright. But then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well, human," Thule said, his voice a low growl. "We will listen to your proposal. But know this: any sign of treachery, any hint of deception, and I will personally see to it that the Avalon and its crew are obliterated." Ryan nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, Admiral. I assure you our intentions are sincere. Let's begin the negotiations." As they moved to a nearby chamber set up for the talks, Ryan couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for peace after all. The diplomatic effort. The chamber prepared for the negotiations was a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere outside. Hollow screens lined the walls, displaying various maps of the galaxy, military deployments, and resource allocations. The NASAT officers had set up a large table in the center, its surface glowing with projected star charts that highlighted the contested regions between human and NASAT space. Ryan took his seat opposite Admiral Thule, the weight of the task before him pressing down on his shoulders. As the session began, Ryan carefully laid out the human perspective, focusing on the dire consequences of continued conflict. He emphasized that the Avalon and its sister ships were not a threat, but a symbol of humanity's desire for peace. The colony ships, he explained, were filled with civilians, men, women, and children, who had no interest in war, but were instead seeking a new beginning among the stars. Admiral Thule listened in silence, his expression inscrutable. When Ryan finished, Thule leaned forward, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Your words are well spoken, human, but words alone are not enough. My people demand justice for the countless lives lost at the hands of your kind." Ryan took a deep breath, knowing that this was the critical moment. "Admiral Thule, I understand the need for justice, and I am not here to deny the pain and suffering that our conflict has caused. But I believe that true justice can only be achieved through reconciliation, not through further bloodshed. If we continue this war, there will be no end to the cycle of violence. Both our civilizations will be doomed to perpetual conflict, and in the end, there will be no victor, only ruins." Thule's gaze remained fixed on Ryan, his bionic eye whirring as it adjusted focus. "You speak of reconciliation, but how can we trust your people after all that has happened? How do we know this is not another deception?" Ryan knew that gaining the trust of the NASAT would be a monumental challenge. "Trust must be earned, Admiral. I understand that, and I am willing to take the first step. I propose a joint commission, a team of humans and Nasat, working together to investigate the causes of our conflict. Let us uncover the truth of how this war began, and from that truth, build a foundation for peace. Thul's mandibles clicked again, this time in a gesture that Ryan had come to recognize as contemplation. A joint commission. It is an interesting proposal, human, but it will not be enough to satisfy those who demand immediate retribution. Ryan nodded, expecting this response. Then let us address those concerns directly. I propose a ceasefire, immediate and unconditional. During this ceasefire, both sides will pull back their forces from the contested zones and allow for humanitarian aid to be delivered to those affected by the war. We can use this time to establish the Joint Commission and begin the process of building trust. The room fell silent as Thul considered the proposal. The other Nasat officers exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from skepticism to cautious optimism. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Thul spoke. Very well, human. I will agree to a ceasefire, but know this. Any violation of this truce will be met with swift and overwhelming force. The Nasat Empire will not be deceived or taken advantage of. Ryan exhaled, a wave of relief washing over him. Thank you, Admiral Thul. I assure you the United Earth Federation is committed to this peace process. We will do everything in our power to ensure that the ceasefire is upheld. With the initial terms of the ceasefire agreed upon, the two sides began to work out the details. The negotiations stretched on for hours, with both sides making concessions and adjustments to the plan. Ryan was acutely aware that the success of these talks hinged not just on the terms themselves, but on the trust and cooperation that could be built in these critical early stages. As the session finally drew to a close, Ryan couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The ceasefire was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in centuries, there was a real possibility that the war could end, and that humanity and the Nasat could find a way to coexist in peace. As he left the chamber, Ryan was met by the other members of the human delegation, who had been anxiously waiting outside. "How did it go?" one of them asked, his voice tinged with nervous anticipation. Ryan managed a tired smile. "We have a ceasefire. It's a start, but there's still a long road ahead." The delegation members exchanged relieved looks, but Ryan knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The ceasefire was only a temporary measure, and the real challenge would be in maintaining it and building on it to create a lasting peace. But for now, there was hope. And that, Ryan thought, was something worth fighting for. The tactical planning, with the ceasefire in place, both the human and Nasat forces began the delicate process of withdrawing from the contested zones. The tension in the air was palpable, as any misstep could reignite the conflict and shatter the fragile truce. Ryan and Admiral Thul, now the co-chairs of the newly established Joint Commission, were tasked with overseeing the withdrawal and ensuring that both sides adhered to the terms of the ceasefire. The Joint Commission was composed of military leaders, diplomats, and experts from both sides, all working together to navigate the complex and often treacherous path toward peace. The Commission's first order of business was to establish a framework for the investigation into the origins of the war. This investigation was critical, as it would help to address the grievances that had fueled the conflict for so long. Ryan spent countless hours in meetings, poring over historical records, and coordinating with the Nasat representatives. The process was slow and painstaking, as each piece of evidence was carefully examined and cross-referenced. The goal was to build a comprehensive understanding of how the war had started and what could be done to prevent it from ever happening again. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that there were deep-seated misunderstandings and misconceptions on both sides. The war had been sparked by a series of incidents that, in isolation, seemed insignificant. But when viewed in the broader context, they revealed a pattern of escalating tensions and mutual distrust. One of the key findings of the Commission was the role of misinformation and propaganda in fueling the conflict. Both the human and Nasat governments had used propaganda to demonize the other side, portraying them as ruthless aggressors bent on domination. This had created a vicious cycle of fear and hostility, making it nearly impossible for either side to see the other as anything but an enemy. Ryan and Thule both recognized the importance of addressing this issue head-on. They proposed a series of joint media initiatives aimed at countering the decades of propaganda and promoting a more balanced and accurate portrayal of the other side. These initiatives would include joint documentaries, cultural exchanges, and educational programs, all designed to foster a better understanding and appreciation of each other's cultures and histories. But the road to peace was not without its challenges. As the investigation continued, it became clear that there were factions on both sides that were opposed to the ceasefire and the peace process. These factions, made up of hardliners and extremists, saw the ceasefire as a betrayal and were determined to undermine it. Reports began to surface of skirmishes in the border regions as rogue elements from both sides attempted to provoke a return to hostilities. Ryan knew that if these incidents were allowed to escalate, the ceasefire could collapse, and all their efforts would be for naught. In response, the Joint Commission established a rapid response team composed of elite soldiers from both the human and NASAT militaries. This team was tasked with investigating and neutralizing any threats to the ceasefire and ensuring that the peace process remained on track. Ryan and Thule worked closely with the leaders of this team, providing them with the intelligence and support they needed to carry out their mission. It was a delicate balancing act, as they had to be firm in their resolve to uphold the ceasefire, while also being mindful of the need to avoid unnecessary provocation. Despite the challenges, the Joint Commission made steady progress. The investigation into the origins of the war was nearing completion, and the results were promising. The findings were presented to both the human and NASAT governments, along with a series of recommendations for how to move forward. The recommendations included a proposal for a formal peace treaty to be signed by the leaders of both civilizations. This treaty would include provisions for mutual disarmament, the establishment of neutral zones, and the creation of a permanent diplomatic council to oversee relations between the two species. As the day of the treaty signing approached, the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. There was a sense that, for the first time in centuries, there was a real chance for lasting peace. But there was also a recognition that the road ahead would be difficult, and that there were still many obstacles to overcome. Ryan stood on the observation deck of the Avalon, looking out at the stars. He knew that the success of the peace process depended not just on the leaders and diplomats, but on the people themselves. The wounds of war ran deep, and it would take time and effort to heal them. But as he gazed out at the vast expanse of space, Ryan felt a renewed sense of hope. The war had been long and brutal, but it had not destroyed humanity's capacity for compassion, for understanding, for peace. And that, he thought, was a victory worth fighting for. The shadows of wars. The day of the treaty signing drew nearer. The tension across both human and NASAT territories grew palpable. The prospect of peace, while welcomed by many, was also a source of anxiety and fear. The hardliners on both sides were not easily swayed, and their voices grew louder as the historic moment approached. For some, the idea of peace was an affront to the sacrifices made during the long years of war. For others, it was a threat to their power and influence. Ryan Collins was acutely aware of these undercurrents as he and Admiral Thule prepared for the final round of negotiations. The treaty had been meticulously drafted, with input from both sides to ensure that it addressed the concerns and needs of both civilizations. But even the most carefully crafted document could not guarantee lasting peace if the will to uphold it was not strong enough. In the days leading up to the signing, there were several incidents that threatened to derail the process. A series of bombings in a human colony, believed to be the work of NASAT extremists, left dozens dead and hundreds injured. In retaliation, a group of human militants attacked a NASAT outpost, killing several soldiers and civilians. Both sides condemned the attacks, but the damage was done. The fragile trust that had been built over months of negotiations was shaken, and the risk of renewed hostilities loomed large. Ryan and Thule convened an emergency meeting of the Joint Commission to address the crisis. The atmosphere was tense as the members debated how to respond to the escalating violence. Some argued for a show of force to demonstrate that the CSIF would be upheld at any cost. Others urged caution, warning that any military action could be seen as an act of aggression and provoke further violence. Ryan knew that a heavy-handed response could easily escalate into full-blown war, but he also understood the need to maintain order and prevent further attacks. After hours of heated discussion, the Commission reached a consensus. They would deploy the rapid response team to secure the affected areas and prevent any further incidents. At the same time, they would increase efforts to engage with local communities to build trust and support for the peace process. As the rapid response team moved in, Ryan and Thule worked tirelessly to keep the lines of communication open between the two sides. They reached out to community leaders, military commanders, and government officials, urging them to stand firm in their commitment to peace. It was a delicate balancing act, as they sought to diffuse tensions without appearing weak or indecisive. In the midst of this crisis, Ryan received an unexpected message. It was from a high-ranking NASAT officer who had been a vocal opponent of the peace process. The officer requested a private meeting, claiming to have information that could change the course of the negotiations. Despite his reservations, Ryan agreed to the meeting, hoping that it might offer a way to salvage the situation. The meeting took place in a secure location, far from the prying eyes of the media and the public. The NASAT officer, General Varus, was a seasoned veteran with a reputation for ruthlessness. As they sat down to talk, Ryan could see the weariness in the general's eyes, a reflection of the toll that decades of war had taken on both sides. "Ambassador Collins," Varus began, his voice low and measured, "I have spent my entire career fighting your people. I have seen the devastation, the loss, the hatred that this war has bred. And I have come to realize that it cannot go on. But there are those within my ranks who do not share my view. They see this peace as a betrayal, and they will do anything to stop it." Ryan listened intently, his mind racing as Varus outlined the plot. A faction within the NASAT military, led by a rogue admiral, was planning a coup. Their goal was to seize control of the government and launch a preemptive strike against humanity to prevent the peace treaty from being signed. The plot was already in motion, and the coup could happen at any moment. Ryan's heart sank as the implications of Varus's words sank in. If the coup succeeded, it would plunge both civilizations back into war, and all their efforts to build peace would be for nothing. But Varus was not finished. "There is a way to stop this," the general continued. "I have loyalists within the military who are willing to act, but they need your help. We can neutralize the rogue admiral and his forces, but we will need human support to do it. If you can commit a strike team to assist us, we can prevent the coup and save the peace process." Ryan knew that this was a gamble. Committing a human strike team to assist in what was essentially a NASAT internal matter could be seen as an act of war. But if they did nothing, the coup would almost certainly succeed, and the consequences would be catastrophic. After a moment of deliberation, Ryan made his decision. "General Varus," he said, his voice steady, "I will contact my superiors and arrange for the support you need. But we must move quickly. If we are to stop this coup, we cannot afford to hesitate." Varus nodded, his expression grave. "Agreed. I will coordinate with my forces and prepare for the operation. We strike at dawn." The following hours were a blur of activity as Ryan coordinated with the human military and the Joint Commission to assemble the strike team. The mission was highly classified, with only a handful of people aware of the true nature of the operation. The strike team, composed of elite soldiers from both the human and NASAT militaries, was briefed and deployed with the utmost secrecy. As dawn approached, the strike team moved into position. The rogue admiral and his forces had established a stronghold in a remote NASAT outpost, where they were finalizing their plans for the coup. The operation was risky, with little margin for error, but the stakes were too high to do anything less than succeed. The assault on the outpost was swift and decisive. The strike team, working in perfect coordination, neutralized the rogue forces and secured the area. The rogue admiral was captured, along with several of his key supporters. The coup was over before it could even begin. When the dust settled, Ryan received word from General Varus that the operation had been a success. The threat to the peace process had been neutralized, and the path to the treaty signing was clear once more. But the cost of the operation weighed heavily on Ryan's mind. Lives had been lost, and the fragile trust between the two sides had been tested once again. As Ryan returned to the Avalon, he couldn't shake the feeling that the peace they had fought so hard to achieve was still on shaky ground. The rogue admiral's coup had been thwarted, but the underlying tensions that had fueled it remained. There was still much work to be done if they were to secure a lasting peace. In the days that followed, the final preparations for the treaty signing were made. Security was tightened, and every precaution was taken to ensure that the event would proceed without incident. But even as the stage was set for this historic moment, Ryan knew that the real challenge would come after the treaty was signed. The signing itself was a solemn affair, attended by the leaders of both civilizations and broadcast across the galaxy. As Ryan and Admiral Thule stood side by side, watching as their respective leaders signed the document that would end centuries of war, there was a sense of both relief and apprehension. They had achieved something remarkable, but the journey was far from over. When the signing was complete and the cheers of the assembled crowd echoed through the chamber, Ryan allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The war was over, but the scars it had left would take time to heal. There would be setbacks and challenges ahead, but for now there was hope. And that, Ryan thought, was worth all the struggle and sacrifice. Rebuilding trust. The peace treaty, now officially signed, marked the beginning of a new era. However, the reality of peace proved to be as complex and challenging as the war that preceded it. The Joint Commission, now tasked with overseeing the implementation of the treaty, faced an uphill battle in rebuilding the trust that had been shattered by years of conflict. One of the first challenges was disarmament. The treaty called for a gradual reduction of military forces on both sides, with a focus on reallocating resources to humanitarian efforts and infrastructure development. This process was met with resistance, particularly from those who had built their careers and identities around the military. For many soldiers and officers, the transition to a peacetime role was difficult, and there were fears that disarmament would leave their civilizations vulnerable to future threats. To address these concerns, the Joint Commission established a series of programs aimed at helping military personnel transition to civilian life. These programs included retraining initiatives, counseling services, and job placement assistance. The goal was to ensure that those who had served in the war could find new purpose in the post-war world. Ryan took a personal interest in these efforts, visiting military bases and speaking with soldiers about their concerns. He knew that the success of the peace process depended not just on the actions of leaders and diplomats, but on the willingness of ordinary people to embrace change. As he listened to their stories, Ryan was reminded of the deep bonds of camaraderie and loyalty that had been forged in the crucible of war. He knew that these bonds could be a powerful force for good if they could be redirected towards building a better future. At the same time, the Commission faced the challenge of addressing the deep-seated prejudices and animosities that had taken root over the years. Propaganda and misinformation had played a significant role in shaping public perceptions of the enemy, and undoing this damage would take time and effort. To this end, the Commission launched a series of cultural exchange programs designed to foster understanding and empathy between humans and Nasat. These programs included joint educational initiatives where students from both civilizations could learn about each other's histories and cultures. There were also artistic exchanges, where musicians, artists, and writers from both sides collaborated on projects that celebrated their shared humanity. Ryan himself became a vocal advocate for these programs, giving speeches and interviews that emphasized the importance of reconciliation and mutual respect. He knew that changing hearts and minds was a slow process, but he believed that it was the key to ensuring that the peace they had fought for would endure. Despite these efforts, there were still those who sought to undermine the peace. Extremist groups on both sides continued to carry out attacks, hoping to reignite the conflict. These groups were small in number, but their actions had an outsized impact, sowing fear and distrust among the broader population. The Joint Commission responded by redoubling its efforts to root out these extremists, while also working to address the underlying grievances that fueled their anger. This included engaging with marginalized communities, providing economic support, and addressing issues of inequality and injustice that had been exacerbated by the war. As the months passed, the impact of the peace treaty began to take hold. The ceasefire held, and there were fewer reports of violence. The cultural exchange programs were met with enthusiasm, particularly among the younger generations, who were eager to move beyond the divisions of the past. There were even signs of economic recovery, as trade between the two civilizations resumed and new opportunities for cooperation emerged. But the road to peace was not without its setbacks. In one particularly troubling incident, a Nasat trade convoy was ambushed by human pirates, resulting in the deaths of several Nasat civilians. The incident threatened to reignite hostilities, and Ryan found himself once again at the center of crisis management. The Joint Commission acted swiftly, condemning the attack and launching an investigation to bring the perpetrators to justice. Ryan personally traveled to the site of the attack, meeting with the families of the victims and offering his condolences. It was a difficult and emotional moment, but it was also an opportunity to reaffirm the commitment to peace. As he stood before the grieving families, Ryan spoke from the heart. "I cannot undo the pain that has been caused. But I promise you this, we will not allow the actions of a few to destroy what we have built. We will continue to work for peace not just for ourselves but for future generations. We owe it to those who have suffered and to those who have yet to be born to create a world where such tragedies no longer happen." The words resonated with the Nasat, and the incident, while tragic, did not derail the peace process. Instead, it became a turning point, a reminder of the fragility of what they had achieved and the importance of vigilance in preserving it. In the following years, the relationship between humans and Nasat continued to evolve. There were still challenges and tensions, but there was also progress. Joint ventures in science, technology, and exploration opened new frontiers for both civilizations. The exchange programs led to a new generation of leaders who were committed to cooperation and understanding. Ryan, now a respected elder statesman, looked back on the years of struggle and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The road to peace had been long and arduous, but it had been worth it. The galaxy was no longer defined by war and hatred, but by the potential for something greater. As he gazed out at the stars, Ryan knew that the future was still uncertain. There would always be challenges and threats, but he also knew that humanity and the Nasat had the strength and resilience to face them together. The peace they had forged was not just a treaty, but a foundation for a new era, one where the possibilities were as vast and infinite as the cosmos itself. A new dawn years had passed since the signing of the peace treaty, and the galaxy had undergone a transformation. The scars of war were still visible, but they had begun to heal, replaced by new growth and renewal. The Joint Commission, once focused solely on managing the aftermath of the conflict, had evolved into a permanent body dedicated to fostering cooperation and ensuring the continued stability of the galaxy. Ryan Collins, now well into his later years, had become a symbol of the peace process. His tireless work to bridge the divide between humans and Nasat had earned him the respect and admiration of both civilizations. Yet, despite the accolades and the progress that had been made, Ryan remained humble, always mindful of the sacrifices that had been required to achieve this peace. As he sat in his office aboard the Avalon, now a diplomatic hub rather than a warship, Ryan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The war that had once seemed endless was now a distant memory, replaced by a new era of cooperation and shared purpose. The galaxy was no longer defined by conflict, but by the potential for discovery and growth. The Joint Commission had overseen the establishment of new colonies, where humans and Nasat lived and worked side by side. These colonies, once the cause of so much tension, had become thriving communities, exemplifying the possibilities of what could be achieved when two civilizations came together in the pursuit of common goals. Education had been a key focus of the post-war era. Schools and universities across the galaxy now offered programs that emphasized the shared history and values of humans and Nasat. Students learned not just about the war, but about the rich cultures and traditions that had been overshadowed by the conflict. They were taught to see each other not as enemies, but as partners in the journey toward a better future. Ryan had been a strong advocate for these educational initiatives, believing that the younger generations were the key to ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. He often visited schools and spoke with students, encouraging them to think critically, to question assumptions, and to embrace the diversity that made their galaxy so unique. One of the most significant achievements of the post-war era was the creation of the Galactic Council, a new governing body that represented both humans and Nasat, as well as other species that had been affected by the war. The Council was tasked with maintaining peace and stability in the galaxy, mediating disputes, and promoting cooperation on issues such as trade, environmental protection, and scientific research. Ryan had played a crucial role in the formation of the Council, using his experience and influence to bring together the various factions and ensure that all voices were heard. The Council was not without its challenges. Debates were often heated and consensus was not always easy to achieve, but it was a significant step forward in the evolution of galactic governance. As the years went by, the Council's influence grew, and it became a beacon of hope for those who had once feared that the galaxy would never escape the cycle of war. Under its guidance, new alliances were formed, and old rivalries were set aside in favor of collaboration and mutual benefit. One of the most ambitious projects undertaken by the Council was the establishment of the Interstellar Exploration Initiative, a joint venture that brought together the best minds from across the galaxy to explore uncharted regions of space. The initiative was driven by a spirit of curiosity and discovery, as well as a desire to expand the boundaries of knowledge and understanding. Ryan had been an early supporter of the initiative, believing that exploration was not just about finding new worlds, but about expanding the horizons of what was possible. He had often spoken of the need to look beyond the present, to imagine a future that was not limited by the past. As the first wave of exploration vessels prepared to depart, Ryan was invited to speak at the launch ceremony. The event was broadcast across the galaxy, and millions of people tuned in to hear his words. As he stood before the gathered crowd, the weight of the moment was not lost on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady and clear, "we stand at the threshold of a new era, an era defined not by the divisions of the past, but by the possibilities of the future. Today we embark on a journey into the unknown, driven by our shared curiosity and our desire to learn and grow. This is the legacy of the peace we have built, a legacy of hope, of discovery, and of unity." He paused, looking out at the faces of those gathered before him. "We have come a long way, but our journey is far from over. The galaxy is vast, and there is so much more to explore, to understand, and to create. Let us move forward with courage, with determination, and with the knowledge that together there is nothing we cannot achieve." As the crowd erupted in applause, Ryan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The war that had once threatened to destroy everything had given way to a new dawn, one filled with promise and potential. The future was bright, and for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt at peace. As the exploration vessels launched into the stars, their engines glowing brightly against the backdrop of space, Ryan watched with a sense of awe. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was also filled with endless possibilities, and that, he knew, was something worth celebrating.